The rain came down like a verdict I couldn't appeal, cold and merciless against my skin. I ran through the empty parking lot, mascara bleeding down my face, mixing with rain and the kind of tears that come from exhaustion rather than sadness. My uniform clung to me like a second skin, and my purse, heavy with the weight of unpaid bills and broken dreams, slapped against my hip with each desperate step. Where the hell was my car? The answer hit me like a slap: repo'd. They'd taken it mid-shift, leaving nothing but an oil stain and a neon pink notice that read, "Vehicle recovered," in letters that might as well have spelled out, failure. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. 24 years old and I couldn't even keep a car. The thought burned worse than the cold. I fumbled through my bag, fingers numb, searching for keys that weren't there anymore, for a solution that didn't exist. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the parking lot in harsh white light, and that's when I saw it. An Aston Martin. Sleek, black, expensive enough to represent everything I'd never have. It sat at the far end of the lot like a dark promise, and something reckless stirred in my chest. Just until the storm passes, I told myself. Just 5 minutes. The door was unlocked, a miracle or a test, I couldn't tell which. I slipped inside, and the world transformed. Soft leather embraced me, and the scent hit immediately: sandalwood, amber, and something darker that made my stomach tighten with an unfamiliar ache. This was someone's sanctuary. Someone powerful. The interior was immaculate, no fast food wrappers, no random receipts, just controlled luxury that spoke of a man who commanded his world with precision. I should leave. Every survival instinct I possessed screamed at me to get out before the owner returned. But exhaustion weighted my limbs like concrete. I'd worked 16 hours on 3 hours of sleep, and my apartment was 7 miles away with no car, no ride, and $23 in my bank account. 5 minutes, I whispered to the empty car. Just 5 minutes, then I'll figure something out. I didn't mean to close my eyes. Didn't mean to let the gentle hum of the ventilation system and the rhythmic drumming of rain lull me into that dangerous space between waking and sleep. I didn't hear the driver's door open. Didn't sense his presence until the car dipped slightly with his weight, and that intoxicating scent grew stronger, mixed now with rain and night air and something indefinably male that made every nerve ending in my body come alive. My eyes flew open. My heart stopped. He sat perfectly still in the driver's seat, one hand resting on the steering wheel, the other holding a phone that cast blue light across features that could have been carved from marble. He wasn't looking at me yet, but I felt the controlled tension radiating from him, the careful restraint of someone who just found an intruder in their personal space and was deciding what to do about it. In the dim light, I catalogued details with the hyper-awareness of prey: expensive suit, charcoal gray and perfectly tailored to shoulders that suggested he didn't need security, he was the danger. A heavy gold watch caught the light, understated wealth, the kind that didn't need to announce itself. His profile was all sharp angles, straight nose, high cheekbones, a jaw that could cut glass. Dark hair, slightly damp from the rain, swept back from a forehead that suggested intelligence as much as authority. When he finally turned to look at me, the air left my lungs in a rush. His eyes were the color of whiskey held up to firelight, amber and burning and ancient. They fixed on me with an intensity that pinned me to the seat more effectively than any restraint. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think beyond the primal recognition that I was in the presence of someone dangerous. "This," he said, his voice low and controlled with an accent that caressed each syllable, "Italian, maybe, or something close, is not an Uber." My mouth opened, but no sound emerged. Up close, I could see everything: the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw that suggested it was late, the slight curl of dark lashes that should have softened his face but somehow made him more devastating, the perfect bow of his lips now pressed into a thin line that could have been displeasure or something more complicated. "I'm so sorry," I finally managed, my voice embarrassingly small. My car was repossessed, and the rain, I just needed shelter for a moment. "I'll go right now." I reached for the door handle, but his hand shot out, catching my wrist. His grip wasn't painful, but it was unyielding, warm steel wrapped in velvet. The touch sent electric shocks racing up my arm, and I froze, trapped between fear and something else, something dangerous and unnamed that made my pulse hammer against the place where his fingers encircled my skin. "You're soaking wet," he observed, his eyes traveling over my drenched uniform, a simple black dress that now clung to every curve of my body, leaving nothing to imagination. I felt naked under his gaze, exposed in ways that had nothing to do with wet fabric and everything to do with the way he looked at me, as if he could see beneath my skin to the flutter of my pulse, the quickening of my breath, the traitorous heat pooling low in my belly. "I'm also getting your upholstery wet," I said, attempting a weak smile that felt more like a grimace. "Another reason I should leave." He didn't smile back. Instead, his eyes narrowed slightly, assessing me with the cool calculation of someone used to sizing people up in seconds, categorizing threats and opportunities with the same clinical precision. I had the distinct impression I was being filed away in some mental system, marked and measured and found. What? Interesting? Dangerous? Worthy of further investigation? His thumb moved almost imperceptibly against the inside of my wrist, where my pulse raced beneath his touch like a frightened bird. "What's your name?" he asked. Not a request, a command, delivered with the casual authority of someone who expected immediate obedience. "Elise. Elise Parker." He nodded once, as if confirming something he'd already suspected. Elise Parker, the waitress who brought me the Macallan 25, neat, 2 hours ago. My blood ran cold. He'd been in the restaurant. I tried to recall serving him, but the evening had been a blur of faces and orders, my distraction over the missing car turning everything into white noise. "I didn't recognize you," I admitted, the words barely above a whisper. One corner of his mouth lifted in what might have been amusement, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Most people don't. It's by design." He still hadn't released my wrist, and I was becoming increasingly aware of his warmth, his proximity, the enclosed space we shared while rain drummed against the roof like a heartbeat. Lightning flashed again, illuminating his face for a split second and revealing something predatory in his gaze, something that made my stomach flip with a mix of fear and inexplicable desire. "Mr." I prompted, suddenly desperate to put a name to this man who held me captive with nothing more than a touch and a look. "Russo," he said after a moment's hesitation, as if deciding whether I was worthy of the information. "Dominic Russo." The name hung in the air between us, heavy with unspoken meaning. It should have been just a name, 2 words, 7 syllables. But something in his tone, in the way the syllables rolled off his tongue, suggested significance. Power. Warning. A promise of things I didn't yet understand but somehow knew would change everything. "Well, Mr. Russo," I said, trying to inject confidence into my voice despite the trembling that had nothing to do with my wet clothes, "I apologize for the intrusion. If you could let go of my wrist, I'll get out of your car and let you get on with your evening." His eyes flickered to where his fingers encircled my wrist, as if he'd forgotten he was still holding me. Slowly, deliberately, he released me, but the phantom pressure of his touch lingered on my skin like a brand. "And go where, exactly?" he asked, his voice deceptively soft. "Back into the storm? Without a car? At this hour?" I glanced out the window. The rain had intensified, if anything, sheets of water turning the parking lot into a shallow lake. The restaurant had closed. I could see the darkened windows, the empty spaces where staff cars used to be. Even the security lights seemed dimmed by the storm, casting everything in shades of gray and shadow. "I'll figure something out," I said, more bravely than I felt. "I always do." The sound was non-committal, but his eyes never left mine, cataloging, measuring, deciding. "The same way you figured out that breaking into a stranger's car was a good idea?" Heat rushed to my cheeks. The door was unlocked. "A fortunate circumstance for you," he said, and there was something in his tone that made it sound less like fortune and more like fate. Less fortunate for others, perhaps. There was a subtle threat in his words, or maybe a promise. I couldn't read him, couldn't get a handle on whether I was in danger or not. The rational part of my brain screamed that I should be terrified. This man was clearly someone important, someone powerful, someone who moved through the world with the confidence of a predator. But another part, a reckless part one didn't recognize, was fascinated by him, drawn to the controlled intensity that radiated from him like heat. "Where do you live, Elise Parker?" he asked, breaking the tense silence. The question sent a chill down my spine despite the warmth of the car. "I don't think I should tell you that." He laughed then, a rich, deep sound that transformed his face, softening the hard edges into something almost approachable. "Almost." "Smart girl," he said, and the approval in his tone warmed me in ways I didn't want to examine. "You shouldn't tell strange men where you live, especially not men you find sitting in cars you've broken into." "I didn't break," I began, but stopped when I saw the amusement in his eyes. He was toying with me, testing me, and I'd fallen for it like an amateur. With a fluid movement that spoke of natural athleticism, he reached inside his jacket. I tensed, but he merely produced a sleek phone, different from the one he'd been holding when he entered the car. He pressed a button, and a glass partition I hadn't even noticed began to lower silently, revealing a much larger rear compartment and the broad-shouldered silhouette of a driver in the front seat. "Anton," he said, not raising his voice but infusing it with unmistakable authority. "Miss Parker needs a ride home." Only then did I register that there had been someone else in the car the entire time, someone I'd been too desperate, too careless to notice when I'd climbed in seeking shelter. The realization sent ice through my veins. What if there had been others? What if I'd stumbled into something far more dangerous than a wealthy man's expensive vehicle? "Yes, sir," came the immediate reply from the front seat. No questions, no hesitation, just instant obedience that spoke volumes about the man beside me. "I don't need," I started to protest, but Dominic cut me off with a single look. "You do," he said firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. "And I'm offering. The alternative is walking home in this weather, which I suspect would take you hours and result in pneumonia at best." He was right, and we both knew it. Still, something in me rebelled at accepting help from this stranger, no matter how compelling his presence or how desperate my situation. "Why would you help me?" I asked, my voice edged with suspicion. "I'm nobody to you." His eyes darkened, and for a moment I glimpsed something dangerous lurking beneath the polished exterior, something primal and possessive that made my breath catch. "Perhaps I'm merely repaying the excellent service you provided earlier," he said, but the words rang false. We both knew there was something else at play here, some agenda I couldn't see. "Or perhaps," he continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper that forced me to lean in slightly to hear him over the rain, "I'm curious about the kind of woman who would choose to hide in my car, of all the cars in that parking lot." His words sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with my wet clothes. "It was just chance," I said weakly. "Your car was unlocked." "I don't believe in chance, Elise Parker." The way he said my name, slowly, savoring each syllable, made it sound like a secret between us, an intimacy we hadn't earned but somehow already shared. Every choice has consequences. Every action creates ripples. The air between us seemed to thicken, charged with something I couldn't name but felt in every cell of my body. His proximity was intoxicating, clouding my judgment and making it hard to think clearly. I needed distance, needed to escape the magnetic pull of this man who radiated danger and temptation in equal measure. "I'll accept the ride," I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. "Thank you." Something flickered in his eyes, satisfaction, perhaps, or relief. He nodded once, then pressed a button. The partition rose silently, cocooning us in privacy once more. "Your address?" I hesitated, then gave it to him. He relayed it to Anton through what must have been an intercom system, then settled back in his seat, turning slightly to face me. The movement brought him closer, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body, see the faint scar along his jawline that suggested a history more violent than his expensive suit implied. "Now," he said, his voice soft but commanding, "tell me about your car." I shifted uncomfortably under his gaze, hyper-aware of my damp clothes, my disheveled appearance, the vast gulf between his world and mine. "What about it? Why was it repossessed?" The question was direct, invasive, the kind of thing strangers didn't ask each other. But something in his eyes demanded honesty, and I found myself answering. I missed payments. 3 months' worth. I had to choose between insurance and rent. He nodded as if this was exactly what he'd expected to hear. And the rent one? I can sleep in an apartment, I said, defensive now. I can't sleep in a car that's been towed away. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. Practical. I appreciate practicality. The car moved silently through the rain-slick streets, the world outside a blur of neon lights and shadows. I had no idea what time it was, late enough that even the bars were closing, the streets emptying of everyone except those with nowhere else to go. People like me. Do you always interrogate women you find in your car? I asked, trying to regain some control over the situation, over the dynamic between us that felt increasingly weighted in his favor. Dominic's eyes glinted in the dim light. You're the first woman I've found in my car uninvited, so I have no precedent to follow. Lucky me, I murmured, looking down at my hands folded in my lap, a gesture of submission I immediately regretted. Indeed, he replied, and something in his tone made me look up sharply. He was watching me with an intensity that felt almost physical, as if he could see beneath my skin to the flutter of my pulse, the quickening of my breath, the confusing mix of fear and desire that made my body feel like a traitor to my common sense. You're trembling, he observed. I'm cold. It wasn't entirely a lie. My wet clothes clung to me, and despite the car's warmth, I couldn't seem to stop shaking. Without a word, he shrugged off his suit jacket and held it out to me. The gesture was so unexpected that I stared at it for a long moment before tentatively reaching out to take it. Our fingers brushed, another electric shock racing up my arm, and I quickly pulled the jacket around my shoulders. It was still warm from his body, heavy expensive wool that probably cost more than my monthly rent. As I wrapped it around me, I was enveloped in his scent, that intoxicating blend of sandalwood and amber and something uniquely him. It felt like being embraced, protected, claimed in a way that should have frightened me but instead made me feel safer than I had in years. Thank you, I said softly, my voice muffled by the jacket's collar that I'd pulled up around my face, breathing him in like a drug I was already addicted to. He inclined his head slightly but said nothing, his eyes never leaving mine. The silence between us stretched, taut with unspoken questions and dangerous possibilities. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. Tell me about yourself, Elise Parker, he said finally, breaking the silence but not the tension that crackled between us like live current. I laughed nervously, the sound too loud in the enclosed space. There's not much to tell. Everyone has a story. He settled back in his seat, one arm stretched along the back behind me, his fingers inches from my shoulder, close enough to feel but not touching, a deliberate restraint that somehow felt more intimate than contact would have been. What's yours? Maybe it was exhaustion, or the surreal quality of the night, or the way he looked at me as if I were a puzzle worth solving rather than a problem to be dismissed. But I found myself talking. The words spilled out, about growing up in a small town I couldn't wait to escape, about my mother's death from cancer when I was 16 and how the world had never quite made sense after that. About my father's quick remarriage to a woman who smiled with her mouth but not her eyes, about feeling like an intruder in my own home until I left at 18 with nothing but a bus ticket and a community college acceptance letter. I told him about the business degree I'd earned through night classes while working full-time, about the string of jobs that never quite paid enough, about the dream of opening my own small cafe that seemed to slip further away with each passing month, each unexpected expense, each choice between paying bills and eating. He listened with unnerving focus, his eyes never leaving my face, occasionally asking questions that revealed how carefully he was paying attention. Where most people's eyes would glaze over, his remained sharp, cataloging every word, every gesture, building a complete picture of me from fragments I hadn't meant to reveal. And your family now? He asked when I paused. Do you see them? My father remarried, I said, the words automatic after years of answering the same question with the same carefully neutral tone. We don't talk much. He has a new family, a new life. I don't fit into it. Something flickered in his eyes, understanding, perhaps, or recognition of pain he knew himself. Siblings? No. Only child. The admission felt more vulnerable than I'd intended, revealing a loneliness I usually kept hidden. As am I, he said quietly, and the revelation felt strangely intimate, a small piece of himself offered in exchange for my story. It made me bold enough to turn the tables. And what's your story, Mr. Russo? His smile was enigmatic, holding secrets I suddenly desperately wanted to know. Call me Dominic. Dominic, I repeated, testing the name on my tongue. It suited him, strong, classic, with a hint of something ancient and powerful, like old money and older traditions. My story is complicated, he said after a moment's consideration, his eyes searching mine as if deciding how much truth I could handle. And not particularly suited for first meetings in borrowed cars. Is that what this is? I asked, surprised by my own daring. A first meeting? His eyes darkened, pupils dilating until they nearly swallowed the amber. Do you want it to be? The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implication and possibility. I should say no. Should thank him for the ride and walk away when we reached my apartment, forget those burning eyes and the way they seemed to see straight through me to desires I hadn't admitted even to myself. I should go back to my safe, small life and pretend this night never happened. But something reckless stirred inside me, a hunger for more than the careful, practical existence I'd built for myself, a life that was falling apart despite all my caution. What was the point of being careful if I ended up alone and broke anyway? Before I could answer, the car slowed and came to a smooth stop. I glanced out the window and recognized my building, its brick facade worn and weathered, the front steps crumbling at the edges, graffiti partially painted over but still visible like old scars. The contrast between this and Dominic's world couldn't have been starker. It appears we've arrived, Dominic said, his voice carefully neutral, though I thought I detected a hint of disappointment. Yes, I replied, suddenly reluctant to leave the warm cocoon of his car, his presence, the possibility of something more than my ordinary life offered. Thank you for the ride. I started to shrug off his jacket, but his hand on my arm stopped me. Keep it, he said. You can return it another time. Another time. The word sent a thrill through me that I tried desperately to suppress. I don't know when I'll see you again. His smile was slow, confident, almost predatory. Don't you? He leaned back, his eyes never leaving mine. I dine at Bellissimo every Friday evening. 8 o'clock. Table 15. The implication was clear. If I wanted to see him again, I knew where to find him. The ball was in my court, or at least that's what he wanted me to believe. But something told me Dominic Russo was not a man who left anything to chance, that every word, every gesture was calculated to achieve a specific outcome. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and reached for the door handle. Before I could open it, Anton materialized outside, opening the door and holding an umbrella over the space between the car and my building entrance with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Good night, Elise, Dominic said, his voice low and intimate, wrapping around me like his jacket. Good night, Dominic. I stepped out of the car, clutching his jacket around me against the rain that had finally begun to ease. Anton escorted me to the building door with silent professionalism, then melted back into the night without a word. I didn't look back as I climbed the stairs to my third-floor apartment, though I could feel the weight of Dominic's gaze following me until I disappeared from view, marking me, claiming me in ways I didn't yet understand but felt in every cell of my body. Inside my apartment, I hung his jacket on the back of my bedroom door, where I could see it every time I entered or left. Sometimes, in the days that followed, when sleep wouldn't come and the walls felt too close, I would press my face to the expensive wool and breathe in his lingering scent, letting my mind wander down dangerous paths, imagining what it would be like to see him again, to have him look at me with those burning amber eyes, to be the focus of all that controlled intensity. The jacket hung on my bedroom door for 6 days. 6 days of telling myself I wouldn't go back to Bellissimo, wouldn't seek him out, wouldn't let myself fall into whatever dangerous game Dominic Russo was playing. 6 days of lying to myself while I worked double shifts, paid bills with money I didn't have, and counted down the hours until Friday at 8 o'clock. I told myself it was about returning the jacket. About closure. About proving to myself that the electricity between us had been nothing more than exhaustion and desperation creating something out of nothing. But Thursday night, I found myself standing in front of my closet, moving hangers with shaking hands, searching for something to wear that wouldn't make me look like exactly what I was, a struggling waitress who'd stolen shelter in a stranger's car. Friday arrived with the weight of inevitability. I requested the dinner shift, and my manager Sarah's eyes narrowed with suspicion at my sudden enthusiasm for working the night I usually tried to avoid. "You feeling better?" she asked, referencing my fake illness from the previous week. The question carried an edge that suggested she knew I'd been lying. "Much better," I replied, forcing brightness into my voice. "Back to normal." Normal. The word felt like a joke. Nothing had been normal since that rainy night, since those amber eyes had looked at me as if I were something precious rather than invisible. At 7:45, I positioned myself near the bar, the folded jacket in a discreet bag at my feet, my heart hammering so hard I was certain the other servers could hear it. Table 15 sat in the corner, partially hidden by an architectural column that created an intimate alcove away from the main dining room. It was already marked as reserved, a small placard ensuring no one else would claim the space that belonged to him. 8 o'clock came and went. I felt each minute like a physical blow, disappointment mixing with relief mixing with something sharper that felt dangerously close to grief. Of course he wouldn't come. Whatever interest he'd had in me had probably evaporated the moment I'd left his car. Men like Dominic Russo didn't chase after waitresses they'd given mercy rides to in the rain. But at 8:15, the restaurant's energy shifted. Conversations didn't stop exactly, but they softened, became more careful. I turned toward the entrance and felt the air leave my lungs. Dominic stood in the doorway, flanked by two men in dark suits who scanned the room with the cold efficiency of professionals trained to identify threats. He wore midnight blue tonight, the suit so perfectly tailored it looked like it had been grown on his body rather than made for it. He moved with that same predatory grace I remembered, commanding attention without seeking it, every step deliberate and controlled. His eyes found mine immediately, as if he'd known exactly where I'd be standing. Something in his expression shifted, the cool mask of indifference melting into recognition, into something warmer that made my stomach flip. He changed course, heading directly toward me instead of his table, and the world narrowed until it was just the two of us despite the crowded restaurant. "Elise," he said, my name a caress on his lips that made my skin tingle. "You're here." "I work here," I managed, hating how breathless I sounded, how obvious my reaction to him must be. "Remember?" His smile was slow, knowing, devastating. "Indeed." "And my jacket?" I bent to retrieve the bag, hyper-aware of his gaze on me, of the heat radiating from his body even though he stood a careful distance away. Our fingers brushed as I handed it to him, that same electric current racing through me, and I wondered if he felt it too, or if I was alone in this madness. "Thank you again," I said, forcing professionalism into my tone. "For the ride and for lending me this." "It was my pleasure." His eyes held mine, saying far more than his words. One of the men behind him cleared his throat discreetly, and something hardened in Dominic's expression before he turned back to me with renewed warmth. "Will you be serving my table tonight?" "If you'd like," I replied, trying to sound casual rather than desperate. "I would." Two simple words, yet they carried the weight of promise, of choice, of a door opening that I could walk through or away from. "Very much." I nodded, not trusting myself to say more, and watched as he continued to his table, the two men taking positions at an adjacent table where they could watch the room and him simultaneously. Security, I realized. Or bodyguards. The kind of protection that suggested either extreme wealth or extreme danger, possibly both. The evening passed in a haze of stolen glances and brief touches as I served his table. He ate slowly, deliberately, as if he had all the time in the world, though his phone rang occasionally and he would answer in rapid Italian, his voice too low for me to hear the words but the tone suggesting business that couldn't wait. Once, his jaw tightened and his eyes went cold, and I saw a glimpse of someone harder, more dangerous than the man who'd given me his jacket. As the restaurant emptied, I found myself drawn back to his table more often than necessary, drawn by gravity or fate or simple foolishness. He'd barely touched his tiramisu, and when I reached to clear it, his hand caught mine. "Join me," he said. Not a request, a command softened by the slight upward inflection at the end. "I'm working," I replied automatically, though my shift had technically ended 20 minutes ago. "Are you?" His knowing smile told me he was well aware of that fact, probably had been watching the clock as carefully as I had. "One drink, Elise. That's all I'm asking." I should say no. Should grab my coat and leave before I fell any deeper into whatever this was. But I set down the dessert plate and slid into the chair across from him, my heart racing as his smile widened with satisfaction. A glass of whiskey already waited for me, Macallan 25, the same one I'd served him that first night. "I thought you might like to taste what you've been serving," he said, echoing words I felt certain he'd used before, a callback to our first meeting that suggested he remembered every detail as clearly as I did. The whiskey burned pleasantly as I sipped it, warming me from the inside out while Dominic watched with an intensity that made me feel both exposed and cherished. "Tell me something, Elise," he said, his voice dropping to that low, intimate register that made me want to lean closer. "Why did you come tonight?" The question caught me off guard with its directness. I could lie, could give him some casual excuse about returning his jacket. But something in those amber eyes demanded honesty. "I wanted to see you again," I admitted, the whiskey making me brave. "I don't know why. I don't know anything about you." "What would you like to know?" he asked, leaning back in his chair with deceptive casualness, though his eyes remained sharp, watchful. "Everything," I said. Then, more carefully, "But let's start with what you do. Because I'm pretty sure it's not just business dinners and expensive cars." His smile turned enigmatic, holding secrets I suddenly desperately wanted to uncover. "And what do you think I do?" "I think you're someone important," I said slowly, watching his reaction. "Someone powerful. Those men with you, they're not friends. They're protection. And people don't need that kind of security unless they're in danger, or unless they are the danger." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or approval. "Perceptive," he murmured. "Most people see only what I want them to see." "And what do you want me to see?" He reached across the table, his fingers finding mine, warm and strong and sending heat spiraling through me. "The truth," he said quietly. "But I'm not sure you're ready for it. Try me." For a long moment, he simply looked at me, those whiskey-colored eyes searching mine as if weighing my strength, my capacity to handle whatever he was about to reveal. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "My family is complicated. We have business interests that span several states, several countries. Some of those interests operate in gray areas. Some in darker places." My mouth went dry. "How dark?" "Dark enough that knowing me puts you at risk," he said, his thumb tracing circles on my palm that made it hard to think clearly. "Dark enough that I should let you walk away right now and never look back. But you're not going to do that, are you?" I whispered, already knowing the answer. His smile was predatory, possessive. "No, Elise. I'm not." Before I could respond, his phone buzzed insistently. He glanced at the screen, and his expression went from warm to glacial in a heartbeat. "I need to take this," he said, standing abruptly. "Don't leave." It wasn't a request. He stepped away, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in rapid Italian that sounded more like commands than conversation. I watched him pace near the windows, his body language tense, dangerous, every inch the powerful man he'd suggested he was. One of his security guards approached the table, the one I'd later learn was named Marco. "Miss Parker," he said, his voice polite but firm. "Mr. Russo asks that you wait for him. He'll only be a few minutes." "I can wait at the bar," I started to say, but Marco shook his head. "Here is safer," he said, and something in his tone sent ice down my spine. "Safer from what?" Dominic returned 5 minutes later, his expression carefully neutral but his eyes still burning with whatever the phone call had stirred up. "I have to go," he said, his voice clipped. "Business that can't wait." Disappointment flooded through me, sharp and surprising in its intensity. "Of course. He hesitated, then made a decision I saw flash across his face. Come with me. What? Come with me, he repeated, holding out his hand. I want you to meet someone. And then we can continue this conversation somewhere more private. Every rational thought screamed at me to refuse. I barely knew this man, didn't understand his world, couldn't predict where this path led. But I took his hand anyway, let him pull me to my feet, let him lead me out of the restaurant and into the night where his car waited with Anton behind the wheel. Where are we going? I asked as the car pulled away from the curb, heading toward the wealthy part of the city where old money built fortresses and called them homes. To meet my father, Dominic said, his voice tight. He's having a small gathering tonight. Family only. He insisted I bring you. He knows about me? The thought sent panic racing through me. How? Dominic's smile was rueful. My father knows everything that happens in this city. Everything that matters to his family. And apparently, you matter to me. The admission hung between us, more significant than any declaration of feeling could have been. I mattered to him. This powerful, dangerous man had decided I mattered, and that decision had consequences I was only beginning to understand. The Russo estate was even more impressive by night than I'd imagined any home could be. Wrought iron gates opened at our approach, and we drove up a winding driveway lined with ancient oaks toward a villa that looked transplanted from Tuscany. Security was everywhere, men in dark suits stationed at intervals, cameras mounted discreetly on every corner, the kind of protection that suggested either paranoia or very real threats. Dominic, I said as Anton opened my door, what exactly am I walking into? He came around the car to stand beside me, his hand finding the small of my back in that possessive gesture I was beginning to recognize. The truth, he said simply. About who I am, what my family does, what being with me would mean. His eyes searched mine. Last chance to walk away, Elise. After tonight, it gets complicated. I should run. Should demand Anton drive me home immediately. Should protect myself from whatever darkness waited inside that beautiful house. But I thought of my empty apartment, my repossessed car, my life that felt like treading water in an ocean that kept trying to drown me. And I thought of how Dominic looked at me, like I was worth protecting, worth claiming, worth the risk of bringing into his dangerous world. I'm not running, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. His smile was slow, satisfied, almost tender. I know, he murmured, and led me inside. The interior was palatial, marble floors, priceless artwork, the scent of expensive cigars and older money. But what struck me most was the warmth, the family photographs on every surface, the sound of laughter coming from deeper in the house. This wasn't just a fortress, it was a home. Dominic led me through a grand foyer toward a room where voices rose and fell in animated Italian. As we approached, I caught fragments, arguments and jokes and the comfortable chaos of family. Then we stepped through the doorway, and conversation stopped. The room was full of people, men in expensive suits, women in designer dresses, children playing in corners under watchful eyes. But my attention went immediately to the man seated in a high-backed chair at the center of it all, holding court like a king on his throne. Vittorio Russo was in his 70s but carried himself with the authority of someone who'd commanded respect his entire life. His hair was silver, his face lined with age and experience, but his eyes, the same burning amber as Dominic's, were sharp and assessing as they fixed on me. Father, Dominic said, his hands still at my back, steadying me. I'd like you to meet Elise Parker. Vittorio's gaze traveled from my face to my hand and Dominic's to the space between us that spoke of connection, of claim, of something significant. Miss Parker, he said, his accent thicker than his son's, each word deliberate. My son speaks of you. He does? I glanced at Dominic, who looked faintly uncomfortable, an expression I'd never seen on him before. Come, Vittorio beckoned me forward. Let me see what has captured my son's attention so completely. I approached, aware of every eye in the room on me, judging, measuring, calculating what my presence meant for their family dynamics. Vittorio took my hand in his, surprisingly gentle for a man who radiated such power. You are afraid, he observed, but not of me. Interesting. His eyes narrowed slightly. You know what we are, yes? What this family does? The directness of the question stole my breath. I glanced at Dominic, who nodded almost imperceptibly, giving me permission to speak the truth we'd been dancing around all evening. I'm beginning to understand, I said carefully. That you're not just a businessman. That the gray areas Dominic mentioned are darker than most people live in. Vittorio smiled, and it transformed his stern face into something almost grandfatherly. Honesty. Good. There is too little of it in our world. He released my hand and sat back. My son is next in line to lead this family, Miss Parker. In 3 months, when I step down, he will become responsible for everything, our business, our people, our legacy. It is a heavy burden. I understand, I said, though I wasn't sure I did. Do you? Vittorio's eyes sharpened. Do you understand that being close to him makes you a target? That our enemies would see you as leverage, as weakness to exploit? That loving a Russo means accepting danger as your constant companion? The word loving hung in the air, and I felt Dominic tense beside me. We hadn't discussed love, hadn't even defined what this thing between us was. But Vittorio spoke as if it were already decided, already inevitable. I understand the risk, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. And yet you came. Vittorio studied me for another long moment, then nodded once, decisively. You have courage, Miss Parker. That is good. You will need it. He turned to Dominic. You chose well, my son. But choose carefully what you tell her and when. Some secrets are too heavy to share too soon. The cryptic warning sent ice through my veins, but before I could ask what he meant, a woman's voice cut through the tension. Well, this is unexpected. I turned to find a striking woman in her 30s approaching, her dark hair cascading over shoulders draped in emerald silk. She had Dominic's eyes, his bone structure, family resemblance unmistakable. Sophia, Dominic said, his tone carrying a warning. This is Elise Parker. Elise, my sister, Sophia. Sophia's smile was sharp, assessing. The waitress from Bellissimo, she said, and something in her tone made it sound like a judgment rather than an observation. How interesting that my brother has brought you to a family gathering. He never brings guests to these events. Sophia, Vittorio's voice carried quiet authority that made her pause. Mind your manners. Her expression softened slightly, and she stepped forward to kiss me on both cheeks in the European manner. Welcome, she said, though her eyes remained calculating. I'm sure this must all be very overwhelming for you. A bit, I admitted, because denying it would have been obviously false. My brother has a tendency to be intense when he wants something, Sophia continued, her gaze flickering to Dominic. I hope you're prepared for that. That's enough, Dominic said, his voice hardening in a way that made several people in the room shift uncomfortably. But Sophia wasn't finished. I'm just saying, it would be a shame if Miss Parker didn't understand what she was getting into. The last woman who, Sophia. Dominic's tone was pure ice now, dangerous in a way I'd never heard before. Not another word. The tension in the room ratcheted up several notches. I felt like I'd stumbled into the middle of a minefield, each word potentially explosive, each silence carrying weight I couldn't measure. Perhaps, Vittorio said, breaking the standoff, Dominic should give Miss Parker a tour of the gardens. It's a beautiful night, and she might appreciate some air after such an eventful evening. It was clearly a dismissal, a way to defuse the situation. Dominic took my hand and led me through French doors onto a terrace that overlooked sprawling grounds illuminated by subtle landscape lighting. The moment we were alone, I turned to him. Who was she? I demanded. The last woman Sophia was talking about? Dominic's jaw tightened. Someone who didn't understand this life. Someone who thought she could change me, make me leave the family. His eyes met mine, hard and uncompromising. She was wrong. What happened to her? She left. Found someone safer, Someone whose life didn't come with armed security and dangerous enemies. Someone better for her. He stepped closer, his hand cupping my cheek. I'm not a good man, Elise. I've done things that would horrify you. I will do worse things in the future because that's what leading this family requires. Are you trying to scare me away? I asked, my heart pounding. I'm trying to be honest with you, he said, his thumb tracing my bottom lip. Before you decide if I am worth the risk. I should have been terrified. Should have demanded he take me home immediately. But standing there in the moonlight with this dangerous, complicated man looking at me like I was something precious, I felt more alive than I had in years. What if I decide you are? I whispered. His eyes darkened with hunger and possession and something deeper that made my breath catch. Then you're mine, Elise. And I protect what's mine with everything I have. Even if it's dangerous? Especially then. He kissed me, and the world fell away. His lips were firm, demanding, claiming me with a possessiveness that should have frightened me but instead made me feel cherished, desired, chosen. I kissed him back with all the pent-up longing of the past week, all the desperate need for something more than my empty life had offered. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. Stay, he murmured. Stay tonight. Tomorrow we'll talk about everything, what this means, what happens next. But tonight, just stay with me. It was reckless. Dangerous. The kind of decision that changed everything. But I nodded anyway, surrendering to the pull between us, to the promise of belonging somewhere, to someone, even if that somewhere was darkness dressed in expensive suits. Yes, I breathed against his lips. Yes. I woke to unfamiliar weight, silk sheets instead of my threadbare cotton, morning light filtered through heavy drapes instead of my apartment's broken blinds. For a disoriented moment, I didn't know where I was. Then Dominic's arm tightened around my waist, pulling me back against the solid warmth of his chest, and memory flooded back. The estate. His father. The kiss that had led to more kisses, to hands finding skin, to surrendering completely to the dangerous pull between us. You're awake, he murmured against my neck, his voice rough with sleep. I can feel you thinking. Is that allowed in your world? I asked, only half joking. Independent thought? His laugh was low, intimate. Encouraged, actually. I have no use for people who can't think for themselves. His lips found the sensitive spot behind my ear. Though I'll admit, I prefer when you're thinking about me. I turned in his arms to face him. In the morning light, without the armor of his suits and the mask of control he showed the world, he looked younger, almost vulnerable. Almost. What happens now? I asked quietly. Now, he said, his finger tracing the line of my jaw, I show you what your life could be if you stay. The truth of it. All of it. The weight in his words sent a chill through me despite the warmth of the bed. Dominic, no more half-truths, Elise. If you're going to be part of this world, you need to understand it completely. The power, yes, but also the price we pay for it. He rose from the bed, magnificent and unself-conscious in his nakedness, and pulled on clothes that had been laid out while we slept, black slacks, a dark shirt, simpler than his usual expensive suits but somehow more dangerous for it. This was Dominic stripped down to essentials, ready for whatever the day demanded. Get dressed, he said, gesturing to clothes that had appeared for me as well. We have somewhere to be. 20 minutes later, I sat beside him in the back of an SUV, Anton driving while two other men I didn't recognize followed in a second vehicle. We drove away from the wealthy neighborhoods into industrial areas where buildings crouched like wounded animals, where broken windows watched our passage with empty eyes. Where are we going? I asked, unease growing with each mile. To one of our warehouses, Dominic said, his voice carefully neutral. There's a situation that requires my attention. And I want you to see what leadership in my family actually means. The warehouse was a massive concrete structure surrounded by chain-link fencing topped with razor wire. More security than I'd seen even at the estate. The men nodded to Dominic with respect that bordered on fear as we passed through checkpoints. Inside, the building opened into a vast space filled with crates and pallets, the air thick with dust and something else, tension so palpable I could taste it. A group of men waited near the center of the warehouse, forming a loose circle around two figures. As we approached, the crowd parted, and I saw what they'd been watching, a man on his knees, hands bound behind him, blood trickling from a cut above his eye. Another man stood over him, Dominic's other security guard, Marco. "Mr. Russo," Marco said, his voice flat. "We caught him trying to access shipping records. He's been feeding information to the Calabrese family for 3 months." The name meant nothing to me, but Dominic's expression went cold in a way that made my blood freeze. "How much does he know?" he asked, his voice devoid of emotion. "Enough to compromise our operations in the port," Marco replied. "Enough to cost us millions. Maybe enough to get some of our people killed." Dominic approached the kneeling man slowly, each step deliberate. "Antonio," he said, and the disappointment in his voice was worse than anger. "Your father served mine for 30 years. I trusted you because of that legacy. Because loyalty is supposed to mean something in our world." "I had no choice," Antonio gasped, and I could hear genuine terror in his voice. "They threatened my daughter, said they'd kill her if I didn't, so you betrayed your family to save her?" Dominic's voice remained eerily calm. "You put dozens of our people at risk, compromised operations that feed hundreds of families, all for one life?" "She's my child," Antonio said, and despite everything, I felt a stab of sympathy for him. Dominic was silent for a long moment. Then he turned to Marco. "Where's the daughter now?" "Safe house in Brooklyn. We moved her this morning, along with his wife." "Good." Dominic looked back at Antonio. "Your family will be protected. They'll be relocated, given new identities, enough money to start over somewhere the Calabrese family can't touch them. That's what loyalty earns in my world, even the broken kind." Hope flickered in Antonio's eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Russo." "Thank you, I swear I'll. But you," Dominic continued, his voice hardening, "you're done. You betrayed this family, put my people at risk. That requires consequences." He pulled a gun from somewhere beneath his jacket, the movement so casual it took my brain a moment to process what I was seeing. Time seemed to slow. I wanted to scream, to run, to do something, but my body refused to move. This was the reality Dominic had warned me about. The darkness beneath the expensive suits and careful words. The price of power in a world where loyalty was currency and betrayal was death. "Dominic, please," Antonio begged, but Dominic's expression didn't change. "Marco," he said quietly, handing the gun to his security chief. "Make it quick. And make sure his family never knows where he's buried. Let them think he ran away, abandoned them. It's kinder than the truth." He turned and walked away, his hand finding mine as he passed. "Come," he said, and the gentleness in his touch contrasted so sharply with what I'd just witnessed that I felt dizzy with cognitive dissonance. We were almost to the door when the gunshot cracked through the warehouse, echoing off concrete walls. I flinched, but Dominic's stride never faltered. He'd just ordered a man's death with the same casual authority he'd used to order me dinner, and now he was walking away as if nothing significant had happened. In the car, I couldn't find words. My hands shook, and I pressed them between my knees to hide the trembling. Dominic sat beside me in silence, giving me space to process what I'd seen, but his presence felt suffocating now, heavy with the weight of violence I could never unsee. "You wanted the truth," he said finally as we pulled away from the warehouse. "That's part of it. The consequences of betrayal in my world are absolute. They have to be, or everything falls apart." "You killed him," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I had him killed," Dominic corrected. "There's a difference." "And yes, I did, because he endangered my family. Our family. The people who depend on us for protection, for livelihood, for survival. One man's life against dozens, maybe hundreds. The math is brutal but simple. How can you be so calm about it?" I demanded, finally finding anger beneath the shock. How can you just, because I don't have the luxury of emotion, he interrupted, his voice sharp now. My father led this family for 40 years, Elise. You know how many attempts on his life there were? 17. 17 times someone tried to kill him, and each time, he survived because he was willing to do what was necessary. That's what leadership means in our world. Making the hard choices, living with the consequences, protecting your people no matter the cost to your soul. And what about the cost to mine? I asked quietly. What about the piece of me that dies every time I watch you order someone's execution? His expression softened, and he reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Don't, I said. Don't touch me right now. I can't, I need to think. He withdrew, nodding once. Take the time you need. But understand this, Elise, I won't apologize for what I am or what I have to do. This is my world. If you stay, it becomes yours too. All of it, the power and the brutality, the loyalty and the bloodshed. You don't get to pick and choose. The rest of the drive passed in silence. He had Anton take me back to my apartment, and I climbed the stairs to my third-floor walk-up feeling like I'd aged years in a single morning. Inside, my tiny space felt smaller than ever, the walls closing in. But it was safe. Simple. Clean of the moral complications that clung to Dominic's world like smoke. I didn't hear from him for 3 days. 3 days of working my shifts at Bellissimo, jumping every time the door opened, part of me hoping and part dreading that it would be him. 3 days of lying awake at night, remembering the sound of that gunshot, the casual way Dominic had handed over the gun, the cold efficiency with which he'd ordered a man's death. But I also remembered his hands on my skin, gentle despite their capacity for violence. The way he'd looked at me like I was something precious. The protection he'd promised, the belonging I'd felt in his arms. Love and death, tangled together so completely I couldn't separate them. On the 4th day, Sophia appeared at the restaurant during my lunch shift. She slid into a booth and ordered nothing, just watched me work with those amber eyes so like her brother's until I had no choice but to approach. He's miserable, she said without preamble. Won't eat, barely sleeps, snaps at everyone. It's quite entertaining, actually. I don't know what you want me to say, I replied, wiping down the table across from her even though it was already clean. I want you to understand something about my brother, Sophia said, her voice losing its sharp edge. He's killed 17 men in his life. 17. Not counting whatever Marco and the others do under his orders. Each one haunts him in ways he'll never admit. He doesn't sleep through the night, hasn't in years. The price of leadership in our family is paid in nightmares and guilt that never quite washes away. I stopped wiping, my hands stilling on the table. Why are you telling me this? Because you're judging him for being what our world made him, she said. But you don't understand the alternative. When my father was younger, before he became hard enough to do what was necessary, our family was weak. People died, good people, innocent people, because he hesitated, because he tried to be merciful. His own brother was killed because he wasn't ruthless enough to prevent it. Her eyes held mine. Dominic learned that lesson. Better to be the monster who protects his family than the good man who watches them die. That doesn't make it right, I said, but my voice lacked conviction. No, Sophia agreed. It just makes it necessary. And if you can't accept that, if you can't love him despite the darkness he carries, then you should walk away now. Before he falls any deeper. Before you break what's left of his heart. She stood, leaving cash on the table for a meal she hadn't ordered. He's at the estate tonight. Father's birthday celebration. If you come, wear something blue, it's his favorite color on you. She paused at the door. But only come if you're sure, Elise. My brother deserves better than someone who'll love him conditionally, who'll run the first time his world gets too dark. After she left, I stood in the middle of the restaurant, frozen with indecision. I could feel my life balanced on a knife's edge, could feel the weight of the choice before me. Walk away, go back to my safe, simple existence. Or step fully into Dominic's world, accepting all of it, the violence and the vulnerability, the power and the pain. That evening, I stood in front of my closet, staring at the few dresses I owned. One was blue, a simple wrap dress I'd bought on clearance years ago, nothing like the designer clothes that filled Sophia's closet. But it was what I had, and maybe that was enough. Maybe showing up as myself, with all my doubts and fears and questions, was more honest than pretending to be someone I wasn't. The decision made itself. I was already moving, already calling a cab I couldn't afford, already committing to a future I couldn't fully comprehend but somehow knew I needed. The estate was lit up like a palace, cars lining the driveway as guests arrived for the celebration. Security recognized me, waved me through without question, and I wondered what that meant, that they'd been told to expect me, or that I was already considered part of the family. Inside, I found the party in full swing, 100 people, maybe more, all celebrating Vittorio's 75th birthday. I spotted Dominic immediately, standing near his father, looking devastating in a black suit, his expression carefully controlled. But when he saw me, something cracked in that mask. Relief, hope, hunger, all flashing across his face before he could hide them. He crossed the room in long strides, not caring who watched, not caring about propriety or protocol. His hands cupped my face, tilting my head back so he could look into my eyes. "You came," he said, his voice rough. "I came," I confirmed. "But Dominic, I need you to understand." "I know," he interrupted. "I know what I'm asking of you. The compromises, the moral weight, the danger. I know it's not fair, that you deserve better than a man with blood on his hands and nightmares in his sleep. But I'm asking anyway, Elise. Stay. Choose me. Choose us. And I swear I'll spend every day earning that choice." "I'm scared," I admitted, my voice breaking. "Scared of what this world will make me. Scared of losing myself in your darkness." "Then let me be scared with you," he murmured, his forehead pressing against mine. "Let us figure it out together. I can't promise there won't be more hard days, more moments where you question everything. But I can promise that you'll never face them alone." Around us, the party continued, but we stood in our own world, holding on to each other like lifelines. "Teach me," I whispered finally. "Teach me how to survive in your world without losing who I am. Teach me how to love you without drowning in the violence. Teach me how to be strong enough for this life." "Every day," he promised, his lips finding mine in a kiss that tasted like desperation and hope and commitment. "Every day, we'll learn together." Vittorio's voice rose above the crowd, calling for attention, announcing his retirement and Dominic's ascension to family leadership. The room erupted in applause, but Dominic never looked away from me, his hands still holding my face like I was something infinitely precious and fragile. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly. "Once this is official, there's no going back. You'll be tied to me, to this family, to everything we are." I thought about my empty apartment, my repossessed car, my life that had felt like slowly drowning before he pulled me into his world. I thought about Antonio, about the price of loyalty and betrayal. About Sophia's words, "Better the monster who protects than the good man who watches his family die." I thought about waking up in Dominic's arms, about feeling chosen and cherished despite all my flaws and fears. "I'm ready," I said, and meant it. Not because I fully understood what I was accepting, but because some truths are too large to comprehend until you're living them. Because love, real love, means choosing someone even when they're difficult, even when their world is dark, even when the future is uncertain. Dominic took my hand and led me through the crowd to stand beside his father. Vittorio looked at me with those knowing amber eyes and smiled. "Welcome, daughter," he said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Welcome to the family." The words felt like a benediction and a sentence, a blessing and a burden. But as Dominic's arm came around my waist, as I felt the weight of dozens of eyes on us, assessing and accepting, I understood something fundamental. I was no longer the girl who'd hidden from the rain in a stranger's car. I was becoming someone new. Someone stronger, someone capable of loving a man whose hands built empires and ended lives, someone who could walk through darkness without losing her light. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more violence, more hard choices, more moments where I questioned everything. But there would also be mornings waking in Dominic's arms, nights dancing in empty restaurants, the fierce protection of a family that took care of its own. There would be a belonging I'd spent my whole life searching for. As midnight approached and the official transfer of power neared, Dominic pulled me close, his lips at my ear. "Last chance," he whispered. "Last chance to run before you're truly mine." I turned in his arms, rising on my toes to kiss him with all the certainty I could muster. "I'm not running," I said against his mouth. "Not from you. Not from this. Not anymore." His smile was brilliant, transforming his face into something beautiful despite the shadows that would always live behind his eyes. "Then welcome home, Elise Parker. Welcome to the darkness and the light. Welcome to my world." And as the clock struck 12, as Dominic became the official head of the Russo family with me standing beside him, I realized something profound. Sometimes salvation doesn't come from running toward the light. Sometimes it comes from loving someone brave enough to walk through darkness, from becoming strong enough to carry your own shadows, from choosing connection over safety and love over fear. I'd sought shelter from a storm in a stranger's car and found something far more dangerous and beautiful, a love that would test me, transform me, maybe even break me before it made me whole. But it would be mine. Ours. Built on honesty and hard choices and the understanding that sometimes the greatest act of courage is staying when every instinct screams to run. The rain had brought me to him. But it was choice, conscious and clear-eyed, that kept me there. And that made all the difference. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.